Here in the UK, Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves in focus this morning. She's pledged to do what is right, not what is popular, in a highly unusual speech just weeks away from the budget on November 26th. The Chancellor would not be drawn on individual policy proposals and declined to reiterate the government's promise to increase taxes on working people. Their promise not to increase taxes on working people. She said she'd do whatever is necessary to get debt under control.
Mine will be a budget for growth, with fairness at its heart, and a budget that supports businesses to create jobs and to innovate. As I take my decisions on both tax and spend, I will do what is necessary to protect families from high inflation and interest rates, to protect our public services from a return to austerity, and to ensure that the economy that we hand down to future generations is secure, with debt under control.
We've got Gareth Davies with us now in studio, UK Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury and Conservative MP. And of course, our UK correspondent Ritika is going to join the conversation as well. Thank you so much for coming in to join us this morning. Great to have you again. So Rachel Reeves this morning opened up, making no bones about it. She's pinning the blame on the Tories, on the governments that came before, for putting her in this predicament. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I mean, just look at the facts, right? We did have a very challenging period in the last parliament. We had to deal with a once-in-a-century pandemic and a war in Ukraine, which pushed up energy prices. So, of course, we had to step in with significant amount of support to the tune of about £400 billion to ensure that businesses and families got through those crises. And inevitably, debt went up, but we had started to put that right. We'd started to decrease the amount of debt in our economy. Labour have then come in and increased debt. In fact, they've made it worse by changing the fiscal rules to be able to borrow more. And so it's a little bit rich for her to come out in this very unusual and very odd speech before a budget just weeks away to say that, it's terrible that we've got so much debt when she is the one that's increased that level of debt.
Well, she's basically saying that what she's aiming to do now is three-pronged: cut NHS wait times, bring down the cost of living, and cut government debt. And she's saying that the Labour government is the one that's willing to do the dirty work here. It's not politically popular, but it's what's necessary. Do you agree that this is necessary?
Let's take each one of those in turn. Yesterday, the ONS published productivity data for the NHS, which showed that despite more money going into the NHS under Labour, the productivity has got worse. It's down 1.5% since Labour took office. So there's more money going into the system and less coming out of it in terms of production and activity. If you take cost of living, inflation has doubled almost since Labour took office, and that's because they pumped more money into public sector pay deals to the tune of about 25%, which we warned would be inflationary. And here we are now with nearly 4% inflation. And then finally on the debt, this is a choice. You don't have to put up taxes. You can cut spending to cut the debt. And she's tried before, to be fair to her, she tried to cut welfare, but she had to U-turn in the chamber of the House of Commons on the night of the vote because her Labour MPs wouldn't allow her to cut welfare spending. We will work with her, as I've said many times before on your show and others. If she is willing to cut spending on welfare in particular, we'll work with her. Taxes are a choice, and what she said today, be in no doubt, is avoidable.
We'll get into the weeds more when it comes to tax and spend and the inflationary pressures still around the cost of living crisis. But I want to ask you about the global threats, because you pointed to, under the Tories, there was the pandemic to weather and the war in Ukraine. Now, today, as we look at the challenges globally, this is something the Chancellor brought up repeatedly about the global threats. And if you look at the recent IMF forecast, you can see global growth is sliding. There has been a pull forward of some tariff front loading, but more broadly, it's been the drop in investment and it's been the impact on demand that we've witnessed thanks to the tariffs. Isn't there an exception here that we are facing extraordinary times?
So we are in extraordinary times, and global pressures always exist, absolutely. And I'm the first to acknowledge that there are global challenges today that are acting as a drag on lots of economies around the world. But I contend that the Chancellor and this government have made these matters worse by overexposing our economy through higher borrowing, higher debt, by changing the fiscal rules, pushing up inflation, slowing growth. These are the things that you can't do when you realise that there are global events around the corner. she in her speech this morning said that we were ill prepared for the crises that we faced because of how we managed the economy and austerity. I would contend that by reducing the deficit that we inherited in 2010, that enabled us to put more money into the system to support businesses and families during the COVID crisis. And so I completely reject what she's suggesting this morning.
There were mistakes all around, I think, on both sides too. I mean, Liz Truss and the quasi-quadrant budget that did roil the markets, that was brought up again. So challenges on both sides about reading the room and how markets feel about the fiscal position of the UK. When it comes to the fiscal buffer, to me, that was one of the biggest hints that we saw when I sat down the other week with Rachel Reeves in Washington. We were talking about whether that fiscal buffer was wide enough at £10 billion, because effectively any time there was an international event, you just get blown off course in terms of where you're going. Do you think that's right, that fiscal buffer should be more than £10 billion?
I'm not going to put a number on it, but as I say, you don't want to overexpose your economy to global shocks, and I would contend that that's what happened at the last budget. Even though she raised taxes by some 40 billion, she spent over 70 billion. And as I said, the ONS figures yesterday show that that is not actually achieving anything. It's not growing the economy, and it's not achieving higher productivity. And so whatever that number is, you've got to make sure that you're prepared for events, global events around the corner, and I don't believe she's doing that.
When it comes to being asked about the manifesto and the other policies, she was mainly asked about the manifesto, and there was other policies that we've been talking about during the past couple of days, lots of speculation around them, whether it would be an exit charge for the wealthy that leave the UK, or cash ISA, cuts to VAT in the energy bills, or scrapping the two-child benefit cap, mansion tax, all of these. Are there any of these specific policies that the Tories would actually agree with? Again, they weren't really discussed as much in the speech. It was just really focusing on that breaking the manifesto pledge.
I come back to what I was saying earlier. This is a choice. When you're in the Treasury, you have a complete choice. You cut spending or you increase taxes. And sometimes you need to do both, by the way, and we've been in that situation before. As I say, she can start by cutting spending, particularly on the welfare budget, which is going to go up to £400 billion before she goes on to taxes. But she's making a choice, and clearly this morning she's setting that out, to go for taxes. Not just on businesses this time, but it sounds like on everybody. And that is a clear manifesto breach. She said she didn't need to do it. She said she didn't need to do it before the election. And then after the last budget, she said that she'd fix the foundations, whatever that means. And yet she's coming back for more.
So if they do raise the taxes, which is expected on everybody, and also maybe particularly the wealthy, the axe could fall on them as well. This wasn't also really addressed in the speech because, of course, we talked about the trickle-down effects from having that wealth exodus, whether it is the taxes or actually the businesses that they create, the jobs that are created. But at the same time, we've also been discussing rumours about a potential exit charge for the wealthy if they leave. That was something, there's been some speculation around that. I wanted to get your thoughts on that policy and what the Tories would do in that position about, if there is this wealth exodus, what you think of that policy and if you would do something similar.
Well, look, I think many of your viewers will accept and tell us that people are already leaving. They're already leaving because of the non-dom changes, because of the increase to carried interest, because of the hostile environment almost to international investors and people who work here. And so if you want to stop people leaving, I would suggest don't tax them on the way out, just stop them leaving. We want the best and the brightest to be working in our economy here in the City of London. And, I'm afraid the mood music and the policies don't allow that to happen right now.
I thought the Chancellor, when I spoke to her recently, was incredibly dismissive about that exodus. I mean, we all know someone who is leaving, and these are very high taxpayers who are deciding to pick up and go elsewhere. When it comes to growth and the attraction of being here, something that was raised by a senior banker in the UK to me was that, look, the biggest risk to financial stability is growth, the lack of growth. Do you think that the government has enough growth drivers here? And they were talking about it being a very narrow growth path that they've inherited. Do you think that's true? Do you think some more breadth in the economy would be welcome at this stage?
I think that's true. And we've had, let me be non-political for a second and accept that, we've had pretty difficult growth since the financial crisis. And while we were improving between 2010 and 2019 productivity in our economy by about 1% in the public sector, for example, clearly we need to do better as an economy to grow. And critical to that is investment in infrastructure, for example. And so some of the planning reforms that Labour have proposed are a positive, and we would support many of them. But the overall mood music of the economy, the overall policy agenda is not one, I would contend, that is conducive to economic growth and foreign direct investment. It's why some individuals are leaving, and it's why investment is not coming in to the extent it could do.
Rachel Reeves would contend that her priority when it comes to growth is to make it more broad-based, and she leveled the critique at the Tories today, once again, that growth was very narrow under previous governments, and she wants it to be more broad-based, suggesting that she probably is going to be comfortable going ahead with levying higher taxes on the wealthy, and she probably is comfortable with some of these things that are driving the wealthy out of the country. How do you think about leveling the growth picture when, you know, some of those criticisms are fair when you look at how growth is distributed across the UK?
Well, I was elected actually in 2019 on a manifesto which talked about levelling up the economy. And what that meant was not levelling down London and the southeast, which typically drives economic growth in the country, but levelling up places like Grantham and Leeds, where I grew up. And that was the right policy. It was met with great public affection, actually. And we started to invest in infrastructure, started to invest in the things that would stimulate that growth in the regions. But again, we had to deal with these global factors and global events like the pandemic, which completely sidetracked us, quite frankly, and diverted a lot of the investment that we would have put into the regions into supporting businesses and families as we shut down the economy. It is what it is. That happens. But it is, you know, interesting to lament on that and wonder what we could have done had we not had those global events.
Well, it's the carrot approach, isn't it? And the Europeans are looking at the very same measures that may be on the cards for the budget too, and it's about incentivising some of those savings to be unlocked from cash accounts and poured into investment in the UK, very similar to the Savings and Investment Union that the Europeans have been talking about. And some of the measures are whether you reform cash ISAs, whether you provide some sort of stamp duty holiday for investing in UK stocks. Do you think those measures would be welcome?
It's a great point, actually. And I think, you know, my public view on this is that we've underinvested as a country when it comes to our pension fund market, for example, in both domestic stocks and shares or any kind of investment, actually, but in particular in private markets as well. Pension funds in this country are typically underinvested in infrastructure and private markets as compared to the United States and Canada and other countries around the world. And we introduced the Mansion House Compact to try and bring that narrative to the centre of the debate, to try and make sure that we get more pension funds. In fact, I'll be asking a question on it this morning to the Chancellor about how we drive more pension assets to domestic investments and in particular to infrastructure.
Gareth, thank you so much for joining us on the back of what was an unscheduled speech today, so we do appreciate the very swift reaction. Gareth Davies with us, UK Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury and Conservative